con la entrevista a Nicholas Chase, un economista de la Agencia de Información de Energía del Gobierno de los Estados Unidos. And now we're going to talk to Nicholas Chase. He is an economist of the U.S. Department of Energy, specifically the Office of Communications of the U.S. Energy Information Administration. How are you, Nicholas?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. How are you today?
Excellent. Thank you very much. And so we're closing up in 2014, and I saw this very interesting study about the number of electric and plug-in hybrids and hybrid cars in the U.S. market. And as much as we hear of them in the auto industry, it seems that there are not that many anymore, right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, it takes a long time for vehicles to come in and become a substantial share of the market because there's something like 250 million vehicles on the road.
Yeah, and can we go through the numbers? So California, obviously, I mean, for at least people who follow the auto industry, it's number one because they have the toughest regulations for emissions and all these kind of things. So car manufacturers pretty much start all their electric or alternative programs, alternative fuel programs in California. That's correct?
Well, there is something to that. They do have very specific programs that some other states share, but are very strong in California, such as the zero-emission vehicle mandate. So that is part of it. There's a lot of different reasons potentially why people may buy an electric or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and certainly the regulations do play a part in that, we found.
Yeah, but the big thing, I mean, for most consumers at least, is the incentives. I mean, we have federal incentives, and there are like some places in California in which the state gives you incentive, the city gives you incentive, and sometimes even the company you work with gives you incentive, no? So it comes a pretty good deal, I guess.
Well, that's right, yeah. There's incentives all the way down to parking on the street in Hawaii, so that was kind of interesting.
Wow. Yeah. So can we go through the numbers? So like first in the U.S. and then like specifically in states. And this report is from I guess 2013, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So can you run us through the numbers? What's the most the highlights of the study, please?
Sure. I would say that the biggest highlight was just how far California stood out. That was the single biggest surprise for me. California accounted for about 50% of the electric vehicles and the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles on the road.
Yeah.
And California is a huge market anyway, but it's about 11 or 12% of the registered vehicle market. So even though it's the largest, it's still punching well above its weight with 50% of the plug-in vehicles on the road.
Does this have to do also with infrastructure? Because obviously these cars need a special way to recharge batteries and all those kind of things. And for some people in other states where they don't have that kind of infrastructure, it's kind of a big factor for not buying such a car, right?
Well, the infrastructure can matter as well. That's a good point. I think there's a whole bevy of reasons you can look at. You could look at, let's say, Los Angeles County specifically. You could look at the LA area specifically, and look at the numbers there and say, well, you could look at infrastructure. You can look at who's buying them in terms of all sorts of income demographics and such. You can even attribute things to the weather in terms of you don't have to maybe run the heater or the air conditioning as much in, let's say, the Los Angeles area as you would if you were northern Minnesota or something in the winter. So you're actually able to use your battery for a fuller range of driving, as opposed to running it down with all the accessories. So there's, I think, a lot of research going on to try to get a much greater level of detail. Or HOV lane access in Los Angeles, let's say, for example.
Yeah, which is a big thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I lived in Los Angeles 2 years ago, and I loved living there, and I could see how having HOV lane access would be a wonderful thing, going down the 405, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just another thing that take into consideration. So, does the study goes into specific brands of and models of vehicles? There
are those data. I have not gone into that level of data in terms of doing a state-by-state analysis, but it is true that certain vehicles are offered more in certain places.
Yeah.
And it is true that you do get another interesting finding. You do get, depending on incentives, or a whole bunch of reasons, but you could have some people buying electric vehicles more heavily than plug hybrid electric vehicles. And one thing we found when we were doing this research is that Washington State had electric vehicle incentives, but we didn't see it correspondingly for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And so the share of electric vehicles sold in Washington State was well beyond the share of the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles in Washington State. And you could make a case, at least circumstantially, that that relates to the fact that it's the incentive structure.
Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, there could be a whole bunch of different reasons why people would buy or not buy those, but it's a plausible explanation.
So right now we're at the end of the 2014, and the oil prices and the fuel prices are like way down. I mean, I saw somebody even in California where the taxes for fuel are like push the price really high. I mean, they're buying a gallon of gas for less than $3. So do you think it's gonna have a good impact into the buying of electric cars or like regular cars? Actually, the opposite, because fuel is so cheap now.
Right.
Is this gonna have an impact in these few months that we're getting this break on the price of the oil?
Well, I would say a couple of things. That would be true, all other things being equal.
Yeah.
Just because it makes the cost savings you would get from having an electric or a plug-in hybrid electric or any very fuel-efficient vehicle different when the fuel cost of driving is plummeting. So that's very true, everything else being equal. I would caveat that, though, with a couple of things. First being, a lot of people perhaps are buying these vehicles, an electric vehicle, let's say a Tesla or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. I don't think they're necessarily day-to-day crunching the fuel economics of the numbers and comparing it to the extra cost of the vehicle. Some people may have reasons such as they have values such as wanting to have environmental friendliness with their vehicle and such that go above and beyond just a simple fuel economics calculation. So there's different reasons people may buy the vehicle. But all things being equal, yes, over a longer period of time, having the lower fuel prices would make the fuel economics worse. But who's to say next year what the fuel prices will be or the year after?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people have that in their mind too.
Yeah, I remember when the smart car came to the U.S. around 2004, 5, almost 10 years ago. Fuel prices were really high. I mean, they were almost like over $4 a gallon.
Right.
And like they were selling good, but then like the gas started going down, and then they didn't very so much. They did so good in sales after that. So very interesting how the people react to this kind of news, huh?
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it really changes the payback calculation.
Yeah, and as you were mentioning, like for some people, I mean, who buy especially Teslas, which are not that cheap, really. I mean, to figure out like when they will compensate for the extra cost probably doesn't figure out in their calculations.
Right. I mean, considering the price point of the vehicle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
right.
We're talking to Nicola Chase. He's an economist at the U.S. Energy Information Administration. So where do you see this trend going? You think the electric cars are gonna like really becoming a factor? Because now it is like less than 3% of the whole auto fleet in the U.S.
Well, when you include the hybrid electric vehicles, yes, you get up to those kind of percentages. That would include the hybrid vehicles such as the Toyota Prius.
Yeah. So I mean, what's your prognosis for this? Like in 5 years, are we going to really see this? Or I mean, it's hard to know as you say with the fuel prices. But what do you think is going to happen with the electric car in the next few years?
Sure. Well, I think there are kind of two major trends, and they seem to be kind of going at cross purposes. But on the one hand, you've seen the decline in the costs of the technology, the battery technology that goes on vehicles. That's not necessarily just reflected in the MSRP of the vehicle price, because there's all sorts of rebates and incentives that you put on it but in general, there's been a lot of technological progress in reducing the costs of battery electric vehicles compared to 5-10 years ago. So there's that trend, which would make them more competitive. But a countervailing trend, interestingly, is the fuel economy standards that are in place, the corporate average fuel economy standards and the greenhouse gas emission standards in place for vehicles nationwide that are going to be pushing vehicles to become more fuel efficient through 2025 and beyond.
Yeah.
So interestingly, electric vehicles, despite the costs coming down for them above and beyond the conventional gasoline counterpart, you would see a stiffer competition against them, against the electric vehicle from the conventional vehicles, because they're getting more fuel efficient. If you've got, a 30 mpg vehicle and suddenly you've got a 40 mpg vehicle, well, that's a very efficient competitor now that you're facing your electric vehicle. So the fuel economics, it could be better with the incremental cost of the vehicle coming down, but you've got a more difficult competitor you've got to face, and it's tough to see where that trend will go.
Yeah, it's very interesting because like Ford, for example, is now and Mini also, they're having like 3-cylinder engines, which are like not long ago they were like for motorcycles, and they're not only efficient but very powerful. So it's very interesting. So
Yes, that's right.
Nicholas Chase, an economist from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Thank you very much for your time. Very interesting topic, and we're gonna keep looking at the feed from the agency. Is there a webpage, right, where all the audience can and look for all this information?
Yes, we do. It's www.eia.gov.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time again, Nicholas, and I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Bye. Esto es Auto 060, yo soy Javier Mota.
Este programa fue una producción de National Latino Broadcasting.